Life is unpredictable, but sometimes fate takes a turn so bizarre and unsettling that it feels like something out of a horror movie. Imagine stepping into an elevator only for floodwaters to rise, trapping you inside with no escape. In this list, we uncover 5 disturbing ways ordinary people met their untimely demise, proving that sometimes the most unexpected dangers lurk in the most mundane places. The night had begun like any other, quiet and uneventful. Jane MacDonald, 31, had gone to visit a friend in Hayride, Lanarkshire, unaware that a tragic accident would soon unfold. While in the kitchen, she slipped, and in a terrible twist of fate, she fell onto a knife that had been left standing upright in the dishwasher. In an instant, an ordinary evening turned into a frantic emergency. The piercing sound of sirens shattered the silence as paramedics rushed to the scene. They worked quickly, doing everything they could before speeding Jane to Monkland's General Hospital. But despite their best efforts, she did not survive. The shocking accident left the neighborhood in disbelief. Strathclyde police confirmed that there was no foul play, just a devastating accident that no one could have foreseen. Officers remained at the scene, their presence a painful reminder of the night's tragedy. The house where the accident occurred belonged to Reverend Sharon Colvin, a Church of Scotland minister. She had yet to speak publicly about the incident, but those who knew her could only imagine the weight of sorrow she carried. Robert Hutton, a former church session clerk, explained that Jane had simply been a guest, caught in an unforeseen and heartbreaking turn of events. Friends and neighbors struggled to process the devastating news, unable to comprehend how such a simple household mishap could have such fatal consequences. The usually quiet cul-de-sac had never witnessed such chaos. Curious neighbors peered through their windows, watching as the flashing emergency lights cast eerie shadows on the pavement. One resident recalled seeing 4 or 5 medics rush into the house, their faces tense with urgency. They did all they could, but the woman they wheeled out in the ambulance never came back. Some onlookers murmured among themselves, wondering if anything could have been done differently to prevent such an accident. Tragically, this was not an isolated incident. 6 years earlier, a 12-year-old boy in Northampton had lost his life in a similar way, a stark reminder of the hidden dangers within everyday household routines. Even the most mundane objects, when left in the wrong position, could turn deadly in a split second. Safety experts stressed that such accidents, while rare, were not unheard of. They urged people to take extra precautions, emphasizing the importance of even the smallest safety measures in the home. Following Jane's untimely death, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, ROSPA, issued an urgent warning. If possible, always place knives with the blade facing downward in the dishwasher, a spokesperson advised. Even though some manufacturers suggest otherwise, safety should always come first. Experts pointed out that while dishwashers were a standard household appliance, they could still pose risks if not used carefully. A simple adjustment in how utensils were placed could mean the difference between safety and tragedy. It was a minor precaution, something easily overlooked. Yet, one simple oversight had resulted in a heartbreaking loss. Experts urged people to be more mindful, to take even the smallest safety measures seriously, and to remember that even routine tasks could carry unexpected risks. These reminders resonated deeply with many who heard Jane's story, as they reevaluated their own household habits and whether they were unknowingly putting themselves or their loved ones at risk. Jane's family and friends were left in shock and grief. She had been full of life, yet in a single moment everything had changed. Reverend Colvin, who had so kindly opened her home to Jane, now found herself mourning a devastating loss. The Hayride had started as a night of fun, a simple outing under the cool autumn sky. Families and friends gathered near Nauvoo, Illinois, ready to enjoy a peaceful ride through the countryside. Sitting on hay bales in a double-axle trailer pulled by a John Deere tractor, they had no idea that their evening would take a devastating turn. As the tractor made its way along the gravel path, the driver suddenly lost control. The trailer veered off to the side, tipping dangerously before crashing into a wooded ravine. Panic spread instantly as passengers were thrown from their seats, some landing hard on the rough terrain below. The peaceful night had turned into a scene of chaos. Emergency crews rushed to the area, their sirens breaking through the darkness. Medics worked quickly, assessing injuries and doing their best to help those in need. A total of 17 people were hurt, including 15 children, some as young as 1-year-old. Tragically, a 32-year-old woman lost her life in the accident. Her name was not released, but her absence left a painful void for those who had been with her that night. An investigation into the crash began immediately. Authorities discovered that the tractor was too small to safely pull such a heavy trailer, making it difficult to control, especially on an incline. The driver, identified as Wayne York, was held responsible for failing to adjust his speed to avoid an accident. The soft, rain-soaked ground along the roadside only made things worse, creating a slippery path that made the trailer even harder to manage. For residents of Nauvoo, the accident was a shocking and heartbreaking event. This quiet community was known for its friendly gatherings, especially during the fall season. Every year, families and visitors would come together for the town's Halloween pumpkin walk, a tradition that filled the streets with glowing jack-o'-lanterns and festive decorations. Although this year's event had been canceled, some people still came to celebrate, eager to hold on to a sense of normalcy. In the aftermath of the tragedy, discussions about Hayride safety grew louder. Some residents recalled similar accidents in the past, realizing that nighttime hayrides could be more dangerous than they seemed. The peaceful image of a slow-moving tractor pulling a wagon full of passengers often masked the real risks involved. As the town grieved, many began to rethink whether these beloved traditions were as safe as they had once believed. Despite the sorrow, the community came together to support those affected by the accident. Families comforted one another, offering help in any way they could. The memory of that fateful night would not fade quickly, but the lessons it left behind would shape future decisions. Moving forward, safety measures would be a top priority to prevent another tragedy like this from happening again. As the investigation wrapped up and people tried to heal, one thing remained clear. Even the most ordinary, enjoyable activities could sometimes hold unexpected dangers. The tragedy of that night would serve as a lasting reminder to always put safety first, ensuring that future hayrides would be remembered for laughter and joy rather than heartbreak. The airport was alive with movement, a place where thousands passed through every day, their thoughts filled with the excitement of travel or the anticipation of returning home. Among the crowd were 2 young boys, drawn to the large monitors that displayed flight information. The screens, housed in a towering sign, flickered with numbers and destinations, an ordinary fixture in the bustling terminal. But what seemed like a harmless moment of curiosity would soon unravel into an unimaginable tragedy. A Transportation Security Administration officer had noticed the children moments before disaster struck. They were gripping the edges of the monitors, their small feet balanced on a metal bar that ran along the bottom of the structure. The sign stood tall and solid. At least, that was what everyone believed. Yet, beneath its sturdy appearance, danger lurked unnoticed. Time moved forward with an eerie inevitability. As the officer passed by, he considered intervening, warning them of the risks, but hesitated, expecting an adult nearby to step in. The boys continued to hold on, unaware of the unseen forces at play, the shifting balance, the mounting tension that would soon break. Then, in a sudden, gut-wrenching moment, the airport was rocked by a deafening crash. A metallic boom echoed through the terminal, shaking the floor as if an unseen force had struck from above. Travelers froze in place, their thoughts shifting from mundane concerns to an overwhelming sense of dread. The towering sign had fallen, trapping the children and their mother beneath its crushing weight. Screams filled the air, piercing through the terminal's usual hum. The TSA officer, who had only just stepped away, felt the impact reverberate through his feet. For a split second, he wondered if an explosion had gone off, but the sight before him told a different, horrifying story. Others rushed toward the fallen sign, struggling to lift it, their hands grasping at the heavy structure that had transformed from an ordinary fixture into an unyielding force of destruction. Amidst the chaos, emergency responders surged forward, their training kicking in as they assessed the scene. A woman lay injured, her body pinned beneath the wreckage, her cries of agony merging with the panicked voices around her. Beside her, two of her sons, once playful and full of life, were now trapped beneath the collapsed structure. The weight of the fallen sign had crushed their small frames, leaving onlookers frozen in helpless horror. A security officer at a nearby checkpoint watched the scene unfold through tear-filled eyes. A passenger he had been assisting moments before now stood trembling, her face streaked with tears. When he asked what had happened, her voice was barely more than a whisper as she recounted the horror she had just witnessed. The realization hit him with a cold, sinking finality. This was no ordinary accident. This was a moment that would leave scars, both visible and unseen, on all who had been present. Medical teams worked feverishly, their hands moving with practiced precision. They fought against time, against injury, against fate itself. But fate had already made its decision. One of the boys, Luke Brissett, did not survive. His mother and brothers, though still breathing, bore the physical and emotional wounds of a nightmarish moment that could never be undone. In the days that followed, the incident sent ripples through the airport community. The once overlooked sign, standing silent and unthreatening for years, had transformed into a symbol of tragedy. Investigators combed through the wreckage, searching for answers. How could something so routine, so unremarkable, turn deadly in an instant? Reports soon revealed the grim truth. The structure had not been secure, its weight far greater than its supports could handle. It had been a disaster waiting to happen, unnoticed by all until it was too late. The tragedy left behind more than just sorrow. It raised urgent questions about safety, about responsibility, about the hidden dangers lurking in everyday spaces. Conversations about structural integrity and airport safety took center stage, but for one grieving family, no amount of discussion could bring back what had been lost. Airports are places of movement, of beginnings and reunions, of goodbyes and new journeys. But on that day, in that moment, it became a place of heartbreak. The echoes of that crash, the weight of that moment, would never fully fade. And as travelers continued to pass through the terminal, glancing absent-mindedly at the screens above, few would ever know the tragic story hidden in the shadows of an otherwise ordinary place. The night started like any other for a young couple in Tel Aviv, but it ended in a way no one could have imagined. Trapped in an underground elevator as floodwaters surged in, their final moments were spent battling for breath, desperately trying to escape as water filled the small space around them. Dean Shoshani and Stav Harari, both 25, had no idea they were stepping into a death trap when they entered the lift in their apartment building's underground parking garage. Heavy rain had been falling throughout the day, overwhelming the city's drainage systems and causing chaos on the streets. But the true nightmare began when the water found its way into the basement, seeping through an opening and quickly rising. As the elevator descended, an electrical failure suddenly caused the doors to lock. What should have been a quick and routine ride turned into a terrifying prison. Trapped inside, the couple struggled to force the doors open, but they wouldn't budge. Panic set in as the water levels rose around them. Neighbors could hear their desperate cries for help, but no one could get to them in time. Residents of the building immediately sprang into action, frantically calling emergency services. However, their pleas went unanswered for far too long. The city was already overwhelmed with flood-related emergencies, and their calls were either missed or dismissed. One tenant dialed for help repeatedly, only to be met with silence or disconnected calls. Time slipped away, and so did hope. The flooding intensified, and the underground parking garage became a deadly trap. The water had nowhere to go, pouring in rapidly, submerging everything in its path. The air inside the lift grew thinner as the couple fought to stay above the rising water. Their struggle could be heard, the sounds of their distress echoing through the basement. Then, just as suddenly, the noises stopped, silence fell, and with it came the realization that the worst had happened. By the time rescue crews finally arrived, it was too late. More than half an hour had passed, and every second had counted. Emergency personnel had to navigate the flooded parking lot with scuba gear, searching through the murky water for any sign of life. When they finally managed to pull the couple out, paramedics rushed them to the hospital, but the battle had already been lost. Dean and Stav were gone. In the aftermath, grief and anger swept through the community. The tragedy sparked outrage as questions surfaced about the building's infrastructure and the city's handling of the floods. Family members and neighbors pointed to years of poor maintenance, believing that the disaster could have been prevented if the building had better flood protection, if emergency services had responded faster, if the elevator had been designed differently. So many ifs haunted those left behind. Dean's family struggled to comprehend the loss, describing him as someone full of life, always looking beyond the ordinary. Stav, known for her kindness and warmth, left behind a grieving family unable to imagine a future without her. The pain of their absence cut deep, leaving wounds that would never truly heal. For the city, this tragedy became a chilling reminder of how quickly nature's fury could turn everyday places into death traps. It raised serious concerns about safety regulations, building codes, and the readiness of emergency responders. Many feared that if changes weren't made, another disaster like this could happen again. As days passed, tributes poured in, and the weight of what had happened settled over those who had tried to save them. The neighbors who had heard their cries, who had fought against locked doors and useless phone calls, would forever carry the memories of that fateful night. It was a tragedy that left scars not just on the families but on an entire community that had watched helplessly as 2 lives slipped away in the rising floodwaters. What started as a seemingly harmless decoration became the scene of a tragic and baffling incident. In a quiet suburb of Barcelona, a man lost his life in the most unexpected of places, inside the hollow leg of a massive dinosaur statue. The discovery came on an otherwise ordinary afternoon when a father and son happened to glance inside the towering Stegosaurus. What they saw was unsettling. Something was lodged deep within the structure, something that didn't belong. Alarmed, they quickly called for help. Authorities arrived and soon confirmed the unthinkable. There was a body trapped inside the statue. The victim was a 40-year-old man who had been reported missing just hours earlier. His family had been searching for him, unaware that he was in a place so improbable that no one would have thought to look. Investigators pieced together a chilling theory of what might have happened. They suspected that the man had dropped his phone inside the statue and, in an effort to retrieve it, had crawled headfirst into the narrow opening. But once inside, something went terribly wrong. He became stuck, unable to move, unable to call for help. For hours, perhaps even days, he remained trapped, his fate sealed by an unfortunate accident. The dinosaur, which once stood as nothing more than a quirky decoration outside an abandoned cinema, had unwittingly become a tomb. Firefighters worked carefully to free his body, cutting through the statue's structure to extract him, but it was too late. There was nothing that could be done. Police ruled out foul play, stating that there were no signs of violence. This was a tragic accident, a bizarre twist of fate that had left an entire community in shock. No one could comprehend how such an ordinary object could become the setting for such a heartbreaking event. Questions still lingered. How had the man managed to enter the statue in the first place? Why had no one heard his cries for help? And just how long had he been trapped inside before he was found? The autopsy would provide more details, but for now, all that remained was a haunting sense of mystery. As news of the incident spread, the town was left shaken. The once familiar dinosaur, which had stood as a whimsical landmark for years, had now become a grim reminder of life's unpredictability. What had once brought joy and nostalgia now cast a shadow of sorrow. Though officials assured the public that it was a case of misfortune rather than negligence, the tragedy left many wondering how something so simple could have turned into something so tragic. The statue, once a harmless piece of decoration, would never be seen the same way again. As time passed, the story of the man and the dinosaur would become one of those eerie tales that lingered in whispered conversations, a warning of how quickly the ordinary can turn into the unimaginable.